A former student from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, fired an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle into crowds of high school students, apparently after pulling the fire alarm switch to bring them out into the hallways in a larger group as he gunned them down. 17 are dead. And this firearm was legally obtained. He passed a background check. The FBI briefly responded to a YouTube comment some time ago when he said that he'll become a professional school shooter. I don't know if you've spent any time in YouTube comment sections. I don't advise it, but seeing atrocious things like that is not entirely surprising. So here we are. And why are you talking about solutions? This is too soon. This is complicated. Let's not have any knee-jerk reactions. These are the things that on one side of the political spectrum we're hearing, and on the other side is we have to stop this. We have to limit guns and limit access to guns or get rid of them. Why do we need them? There's certainly a structure, a cycle to how things pan out after a mass shooting these days. Initial range of emotions from shock to anger to sadness, or if you're me, numbness. And your loved ones, if your loved ones are not directly affected, and you've seen this so many times, it's hard to really think that something's going to be likely to change, and you just numb yourself to sort of manage this. Politicians offering calculated, non-binding statements like thoughts and prayers, and Facebook arguments are popping up, unfriending, everyone, and then so the cycle kind of happens where everyone forgets, and we move on to the next topic in the news cycle, which is probably another person who inexplicably slept with Trump. If you're like me, it certainly seems numbing because it seems pointless to give your hopes up on legislative change. Anyone who can make some kind of statement seems to usually be putting energy into weird or ineffective places, and honestly, a bigly part of the answer, an answer that other countries or societies have tried, an answer that seems fairly logical if the details are worked out, rather than realistically weighed and considered, this possibility that other countries have tried, and without saying that we could try it and see if it works, it becomes a partisan hill to die on. The cold reality is, as long as Republicans hold a majority of the power, legislation to deal with access to guns is going to be shot down. We are, however, getting a lot of, interference. It's too soon, thoughts and prayers. And this time around, we're getting sort of a strange notion that somehow we can make every school a lockdown maximum security facility with metal detectors and armed guards and armed teachers. They're referring to what they call the Israel model. Just listen to this bit. This is from a Fox News panel discussion. Andrew Napolitano, a logical, realistic, calculated purveyor of deep wisdom and philosophy. Let's hear what he has to say.
I essentially agree with everything my colleagues have said, and my heart sank knowing that I was going to have to talk about this because it's such a tragedy. And I like the Israeli model. The school doors are locked, and 2 or 3 of the teachers are trained to carry. You don't know which teachers they are. They do not carry openly. They carry silently and in a hidden way. And how many school killings are there in Israel? None. That all can be done by the Florida legislature. It does not require the Congress. Congress can't do anything. Congress can't pass a budget. Congress can't agree on DACA. We're going to talk about that in a little while. The president, I agree with Jonathan, is very much wedded to the NRA, as is more than half the House of Representatives. That's a non-starter. And there's this thing called the Second Amendment, which they've all taken an oath to uphold, and the Supreme Court has interpreted it as it has in a very pro-individual rights way.
So we have the armed teachers, armed guards lock the kids in prison like they're going through TSA every day to school, and that's somehow more practical and achievable and desirable than heavily regulating firearms, particularly high-capacity semi-automatic firearms or even bump stocks. Board member, so this is a tweet from Shannon R. Watts that she tweeted out. Board member Charles Cotton is trying to capitalize on the school shooting tragedy in Parkland, Florida. The gun lobbyist says he'll work to pass a law in 2019 that forces guns into Texas K-12 schools and arms trained volunteers, aka teachers. So you heard Napolitano, the judge, kind of talk about the NRA is wed to all these congressmen, and it's to the president, and there's so much donation going on. It's actually a moment of fairly transparent honesty that I don't usually expect from the source of that clip, but it's also pretty hard to ignore. Partisan gridlock, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Politicians who accept large donations from lobbies in a political system where private money is allowed to tip the scale far more than public accountability. It's going to be fairly obvious why things don't change. A change in legislation regarding guns may be unlikely until we address money in politics. And honestly, our economic system plays a role too. I'm very sorry, but hate to break it to all the proud capitalists out there, but there are CEOs of these gun manufacturing companies building the weapon that was used so well. I might add, it was built so well that it killed so many people. It tore apart the organs and limbs in mass. So these CEOs of these gun manufacturing companies that built this weapon that was used, they actually make more money when these shootings occur. Profits soar largely because of fear out of both unlikely gun restriction laws being passed. There's this pandemonium that, now we have to stock up. And fear out of, the next mass shooting is coming, and we need to arm ourselves to deal with that. And so we drive more of the population to arm themselves, and perhaps something else that happens there is people will have multiple, not just one gun. So build an extensive library of firearms that may or may not responsibly and be securely owned and locked, and may not be used by adequately trained people even. There's a lot of factors at play in societal violence. There's poverty, desperation, media coverage, national conversation. Easily accessible guns is only one part. However, it's a pretty big part. There's a lot of interesting ways to apply sociological theory, but as I think in this post-shooting numbness this time around, with a growing fear that my 1-year-old son will eventually be exposed at school to a growing epidemic of societal violence, I think of the training that we do for therapists in both school and continuing education. It's CALM training, or counseling on access to lethal means. The idea is find out if there are any guns in the home, find out who has access to them, find out ways that you can make sure that while the person is in an active state of having suicidal thoughts and tendencies, that they, in an effort to make sure that there are as many barriers between them and a gun as possible, and this includes lethal doses of medications as well. Because while we can't guarantee 100% of the time that nothing bad will happen, we need to reduce potential harm, or potential for irreversible harm especially, as much as possible. And a gun is the most efficient means widely available in our society, especially in the Midwest, with which to succeed in completing suicide. You get an impulse, there's a gun, load the gun, pull the trigger, and you can't reverse that. It's effective and irreversible by design. There are things that don't seem possible right now. There are strategies that are more effective than others, that seem more desirable than others, and which seem more possible than others. There's also barriers to those solutions. One of them is in our Constitution, which is probably sided with more religious fervor in a predominantly Christian identifying society than any of the teachings of Jesus Christ. Least of all, he who lives by the sword dies by it. So let's have some hashtag real talk here. People are far more likely to be willing to change his words than anything in the Constitution. Perhaps the biggest barrier is the statement of impracticality. There's anywhere from 270 million to 310 million guns in the U.S. So any argument to limit access is faced with the expression, the bad guys will always have the guns. But it seems to me that with our society in crisis, putting as many barriers as we can to gain a statistically lower chance of death from gun violence is so incredibly obvious in any prescription for change. Whether you're a good guy or a bad guy, a society with less access to the tools that are efficiently designed to kill is far more likely to be a society where good guys and bad guys have less of an ability to kill each other. I know a lot of people say that they value human life, and some even say that they're pro-life. What do our actions say about our values?